Afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Hands at the back. Yeah. Okay, welcome to the session on m-commerce. I've got a really interesting, varied panel of experts for you this afternoon. We are going to explore where m-commerce has come from, where we are now, the potentials of where it could go to next, as well as some of the challenges that we face in bringing those opportunities through. So I think we'll start off by just looking at where we are now and how the growth of m-commerce has really taken off, I suppose. I mean, I remember my first mobile was a brick. I was about 18. You can do anything on it, but now I don't leave the house without it. I do everything on it. It's a hell of a change in a relatively short space of time. So I'll start by asking the panellists, where do you see that this growth has come from? What are the drivers for the growth? And where do you see m-commerce sitting, particularly within the e-commerce space at the moment? Does anyone want to kick me off? Okay, yeah, sure, Jeremy.
So I'm Jeremy, I'm CEO of Eelco. So mobile has been a kind of like a big thing for me for some time, and I can, and still is actually, and the direction of travel for me, is very much just towards mobile, more and more mobile commerce. Why is that? I mean, for me, I think it's the absolute kind of convenience which you get from it and so on. I spent a couple of years back, I decided to go kind of cashless for the rest of my life, which I continue to do. A few years after that, I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to go cardless as well. I'm just going to try and do everything on mobile, and you pretty much can. And I think then the advances we're seeing are in sort of mobile technology and other supporting technologies just allow for super convenient, super fast, super secure experience. It's kind of one of the interesting things about mobile and things like the pay programs like Apple Pay and so on. It's probably one of the most secure kind of means of payment.
Absolutely.
Over sort of like other types of kind of payment. Yet still, it's got a way to go to get its kind of usage levels up. But I think then the fact that you don't need to go out of your house with a sort of like with a wallet anymore, you don't need to. It just is. Convenience is the kind of like the driver, I think, going forward.
Absolutely. Eelco, could you introduce yourself and just give us your point of view on that, please?
Yeah, so my name is Eelco. I am Senior Vice President for Commercial within Nuvei. My perspective on m-commerce is that I think it's already at the majority of, let's say, online transactions is already initiated on a mobile phone. I think within the next few years we'll see the same in store. I think it's very old-fashioned that a lot of stores still ask us to pass a till and go through a queue, when actually you've just been helped by someone who, if they had a mobile device, which in some stores they do, they would be able to have the payment experience sort of whilst you're shopping rather than making that a separate experience. So my prediction is definitely that it's going to take off in the same way that we've seen with online transactions. It's going to take off in stores as well. And then lastly, I think because of the security that sits on the phone, and we've seen the success of the likes of Apple Pay and Google Pay, but it can also be used as a terminal, the mobile device itself. And with Visa and MasterCard now being more open to those type of technologies, I think that's also definitely something that we'll see a big fly.
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of interesting points there about the potential for mobile becoming a very different part of the shopper experience, and we'll definitely unpack that a little bit more later, and some challenges around identification and some of those things. So we'll definitely come back to those points. John, I'd really like to come to you as our merchant representative on the stage. So you've got some really interesting stats that you shared with us beforehand about what volume of transactions you've got coming from mobile. So perhaps you could just introduce yourself, where you're from, and give us some of that perspective.
Yeah, hi there. I'm John Lowe, Group Head of Digital Risk for Frasers Group. So for those who don't know Frasers Group, we're an omni-channel, or are we multi-channel? Perhaps that'll come in the question later. Retailer with worldwide reach. We have such brands as Sports Direct, Flannels, and about 80 brands in total. In terms of the mobile question, I think it's always on device. So I think that's what drives the customer to use in the mobile. But I think a load of factors have sort of come to the same place that have sort of gravitated people onto using the mobile, even whether it's PSD2, 3DS, people are interacting with their mobile device to make or authorize a transaction through the mobile device. It's almost steered them that way. And of course, with the mobile device always being on, then usually with when people are browsing, whether it's on a commute or even in the home, I think, people will click through on ads or links that have been sent by the merchant to actually get them on to their web page. So I think all of that's driving them there. And I think for any merchant that hasn't sorted out their customer experience in terms of mobile solution, it is really sort of in trouble, to be honest, because for us, about 70% of all our transactions are made on mobile. That's in volume, and about 63% at value. So for us, it's almost when we're sorting out our attributes, our transfer rate on pages, and the functionality of our website, it's almost mobile first now. Yeah, it has to be. So because that's where the volume is. So if it's a poor experience, whether it's on a native app or whether it's going onto a web browser to your website, you've got to get that right. As a merchant, otherwise you're in trouble. And we can also see that in terms of payment mix. Obviously, people can pay by card on the website, but then there's the solutions that are predominantly on the phone, and we can see that with the likes of Apple Pay. Apple Pay is sometimes our second most popular payment method on e-commerce, sometimes third, but it's came from a standing start only a few years ago. So actually, it's a payment method that I see will actually come into second place.
Just out of interest, is it on your mobile channel or where customers are shopping on mobile, is the likes of Apple Pay and Google Pay much higher up the ranks than if they were shopping on desktop? Is that something?
Well, we haven't done Google Pay yet, but we've done Apple Pay. So Apple Pay, is a big payment solution, and obviously it's where you place that payment method. Obviously, I think you've got to do your analytics really well, because you've got to determine where is the right time to put the payment solution. Do you put it in your product details page? Do you put it in your basket? Do you put it in your checkout? It's a moot point, because obviously what you don't want to do is kill your basket either. Yeah. So do you go for more multiple transactions, or do you go for the basket build? And I think it's really important that you A/B test in them areas, because it depends on brands. We're a multi-website retailer, so we've got about 100 websites-ish and counting, I guess. So some of them websites behave in different ways, and when we run our A/B analytics, sometimes it tells us this is not a good website to put the payment method into the basket. We'll wait till checkout, and sometimes it's best for it in the product details page, or it's best to put it in the checkout.
Interesting. So you're really tailoring there for who that kind of portfolio of customers is, your shopper base for each brand.
And I think we can get more intuitive than that. And that's certainly on the roadmap for myself is I want to be able to intuitively offer the right payment method for our customers by understanding the way that they've shopped with us in the past, or indeed through providers where they've shopped with other people in the past. So we have that intelligence to be able to, because we don't want a laundry list of payment methods. What we want to do is just offer intuitively the right payment method for the customer.
Absolutely. So we're talking there about kind of tailoring for different customer demographics in particular. So many of us were pretty much confined to our sofas for 2 years through the pandemic. But what it did do was shifted a lot of people to mobile, and it brought in generations who perhaps weren't quite so familiar and comfortable with e-commerce and mobile commerce in particular. So I'm kind of interested to explore two parts of that. One is this sudden growth and has the industry adapted quickly enough? And the other thing is looking at it from a generational perspective. What are we doing to make sure that some of those generations who are not perhaps so digital savvy can still be included in this kind of current mobile first world? Eelco, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
Sure. So my name is Eelco, I'm Chief Growth Officer at Samsung. We are probably on the other end of the spectrum in terms of facilitating all these payments, and actually work much more with more regulated institutions where you need to know the identity of people for real.
Sure.
Whereas obviously in e-commerce and m-commerce, the identity question is sort of sits a little bit behind. It's not always the real identity as long as you can trust the customer. So I think in terms of bringing people onto the kind of mobile, whether it's in commerce or in financial services, it's about giving them the trust that they can share their identities, their payment details, their habits, the information about their spending and browsing patterns, like you mentioned. Like, you need that, but they're very, they need to know that they trust the system, right? And I think mobile is a much safer place than web. I think in general people have much more trust in their phones and the biometric mechanisms around the security of the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great way to help them. But still, there's kind of a long way to go to allow people to actually be safe presenting their real identity, online. And that's where I think a little bit of what we do comes in, a little bit what FIDO does comes in, a little bit of what we all do comes in, so that we can drive both e-commerce and financial services and embedded finance, for that matter, on the commerce platforms, and kind of allow people to be who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to expand on that security point then and look at, to some extent, is it much harder to authenticate with mobile commerce? What are some of the challenges there that you can come across? And on this issue of trust, how can you really foster that in the m-commerce environment?
I mean,
Can you introduce yourself as well first?
I'm Sergeant Košutić. I'm the CEO of FIDO. We are a digital analytics platform that sort of sits in between, be it merchants, be it PSPs, or any solution like SumSub for identity verification. And from our position, so where we stand, we see a couple of increasing challenges, because typically fraud follows the money, right? And we have 3 different angles from which a fraud can typically occur, or the whole matter of trust. First one being actually merchant fraud. So you're simply having fraudulent merchants piggybacking on mobile payments being quite impulsive, doing shopping without much thought for smaller tickets. Mm-hmm. Digital goods as well on that side. But in terms of consumers, what we see is that sometimes not all merchants have same, or they don't have workflows that match mobile specifics, right? Whether you would have on typical desktop environment, like typical e-commerce, you would have IP checks that they don't simply work on mobile, because you switch IP throughout the day, numerous times as you move, right? So these are some of the things that we see in terms of gaps in security workflows on merchant sides, but also how PSPs themselves assess merchants when they apply for an account with them. So there are different angles, to the whole mobile payment industry, be it offline or online, because also in the offline world, pretty much it's rather easy to get a payment terminal nowadays.
Thank you. You made an interesting point there about the impulsivity that's associated with mobile. I mean, there's probably most of us in this room have sat there scrolling on their phone at some point, seen an advert, clicked it, bought something. So The issue there is, of course, you need to balance the delivery of the customer experience with sufficient fraud checks to make sure that you're getting the right balance of conversions, not too many false positives, not too many rejections. So how can either merchants or their providers help to kind of make that a smoother process? I'll come to you first.
Yeah. I mean, this is also an issue, in general in e-commerce, right? So the PSD2 and the whole secure customer authentication has a huge effect on actual cart completion rate. So cart abandonment is in e-commerce relatively high, whatever the SCA is triggered. There are ways that, of course, this can be optimized in PSPs. I'm sure others can comment on that to better extent, do their own assessment and do their own checks in order to simplify the whole flow, so without unnecessary interruptions in the process. And then there's a lot about the merchants themselves. So I think we had a pretty good example of how A/B testing, where to place the button for the quick checkout, how to position it, also plays a big role. But the UX is, I think, the one of the key things that I think m-commerce is not there yet at the level where it could be.
Yeah, answering. Okay, could you expand? Sorry, I'll come to you in a minute, Jack. I was just going to ask Eelco if, from your perspective, as that kind of acquirer or PSP that sits in the middle, like, what's your perspective on this point?
Yeah, I think it's a very fine line between sort of managing risk and getting maximum reward or results out of your checkout experience. What we see is a big difference, and that to a certain extent also explains the success of payment methods like Apple Pay. In the mobile world, when you have 70% of customers coming in through a mobile, the payment mix is very different. There's just certain payment methods that are mobile native that were first developed with the mobile in mind, and then there's others where it's a bit of an afterthought. So abandonment rates that we see and what we see in a mobile environment varies heavily by payment method. And of course, a lot of these wallets that have a very smooth mobile payment experience, they're still disguised card transactions, because at the end of the day, both the rates that you get charged as well as the rails that they run on, it's cards.
Yeah.
But then a lot of the bank-based payment methods, they come from a day and age where it was mainly desktop. So I'm a Dutchman, as you might hear. Ideal, it's a great example. It's absolutely brilliant on a desktop. It improved recently, but it's still not brilliant on a mobile.
And yet it's the predominant payment method in the Netherlands. So.
Very, very much so. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Sorry, gentlemen, I think you wanted to add something, Jeremy.
I was just going to chip in. I mean, I think kind of experience is everything in terms of in terms of driving towards getting that successful kind of transaction. It's interesting. Some of the stats I've kind of seen recently from Visa in terms of just the kind of, I guess as a result of kind of pandemic, the kind of the shift you saw towards e-com transactions. I think in 2021, you had like 53% or something of their transactions were actually kind of e-commerce rather than face-to-face. It'd be interesting to see how it shifted back now, because undoubtedly it's there were kind of particular kind of factors there. But I mean, getting that experience right and getting the kind of that balance right in terms of having the kind of the convenience and taking the friction out of it, whilst making sure it's a secure transaction. That's absolutely kind of key. Interesting, again from Visa, they had some as a result of SCA, which I think has been a major event in recent years for all of us, for better or worse. Then as a result of actually implementing that, you get something like sometimes like 9 screens that people need to go through to actually kind of complete a transaction. I think the average time is 3.3 minutes or something across Europe to make a transaction. Yet for many consumers, you get to 2 minutes and they abandon. And so that's a challenge for us: is how do we get that smooth, friction-free kind of checkout experience customized, to actually sort of be recognizing some of the kind of demographic issues, particularly as for maybe perhaps older kind of generations who don't necessarily kind of like the latest smartphone and so on. How do you kind of get that experience right for customers? That's the key, and that's the sort of thing that I guess, John, across your many brands that you spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I always look at it through a risk lens. Look, we're a merchant, and we're about taking payments. We're not about fraud. So it's about putting fraud into the right context. Don't let your aversion to fraud influence what your payment solutions are or your frictionless journey for your customer. So what I do is we always look at where our attrition points are in terms of our payment, whether that's in conversion or whether that's after people have pressed pay, where's the friction in the payment solution, and what can we do to reduce them attrition points. And obviously a key one is a frictionless journey on the 2FA. So obviously Apple Pay helps with that, especially in a mobile experience, because you've already got the 2FA by the virtue of the fact that they're on the phone, so you're already in a good place anyway. But it's about getting your fraud right, and actually card fraud is not easy to commit now these days. I think if you've got a good fraud solution, and for example where we use ML models, and because we've got so many sites, we've actually got 12 different ML models, and the ML model that we have today isn't the one we had yesterday, it won't be the one that we have tomorrow, because it's continuously learning. But because when you get your fraud in a good place, then you can make maximum use of exemptions. Predominantly, I don't like the low value ones, so we really go for the TRA ones. And on some of our websites and on some of our really big ones, we'll go for about 80% exemptions. Now it means that we might get a little bit of an uplift on our fraud rates because of that, because we'll take the liability share back onto ourselves. It's worth it in terms of the high conversion that we see, and it absolutely dwarfs the little bit of fraud. But I think in the future there's already solutions happening there, because obviously we've got Apple Pay, which has the liability shift. We'll have Click to Pay that hasn't got the liability shift now, but probably will in the future, which is obviously the EMV solution. So if that becomes the ubiquitous way to pay for cards in the future, then and it does get that 2FA automatically, then I think that puts the merchants into a stronger place. It also protects the banks as well, because my view is it's a mutual relationship there where we protect each other from fraud. Is that because obviously we want to get the acceptance rates from the banks, so that's critical. But that 2FA also protects us, and it protects the banks if it comes inherently. So I think there's lots of ways to make sure that you can provide a frictionless journey for your customer now, where they don't even see the fraud, or the fraud check. And in the future, I think that's only going to get even better.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked, I think frictionless has been mentioned quite a few times there, and we're also thinking about customer journeys that are convenient and support any impulse buys, that kind of thing. What I'd like to take that a step forward and look at, where is it going next? I think one of the things that you mentioned, John, was that you're having a really high volume of your e-commerce transactions coming through mobile, but those are people shopping on a mobile device as opposed to paying in-app, for instance. So I guess that's one of the areas we could explore in terms of where is m-commerce going next. But the other thing somebody alluded to earlier was, the developments to the in-store environment. So I feel like we're at a turning point in how mobiles are being used in our kind of everyday lives and our shopping journeys as consumers. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit more and ask each of you, actually, if you can give me your perspective on where you think this is going next. I'll start with you first.
Well, I just passing through JFK Airport just before the boarding, they had a screen that recognized my face and said, "Welcome to the plane." Or Eelco, you mentioned shopping experience changing, but actually MasterCard and Visa are working on programs like biometric checkout, where you actually won't have to have your card nor your phone. think, and that's where I think some of the things that, like self-sovereign identities and, documentless, digital native identities are coming into play, and how you connect your biometrics with some form of trusted identification that doesn't exist on any particular physical form, and maybe not even issued by a state. That's where I think it's going. And actually, the whole development around crypto and the payments and the DeFi is actually, I think, pushing the traditional financial system into that direction massively.
So we may at some point have this convergence of technologies that enables these kind of journeys.
You see the embedded finance, so financial services coming onto the m-commerce and e-commerce applications, right?
Yeah.
You have different standards for, again, identification, KYC, but you also have a whole different set of technologies that are completely different to how we've done things, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Because I think right now, what we're talking about right now is still a development of the traditional technology, the card technologies. Yes, you're putting them into a much better interface and a safer interface, but I think the next step will be just a totally different experience where it doesn't have to do with maybe even bank accounts, it doesn't even have to do with real identities.
Yeah, interesting, thank you. Jeremy?
Well, before we get to that kind of minority report world,
I was thinking the same thing.
It's kind of, inevitably those sort of things will, will kind of come. I think then, the thing I've kind of learned about payments, having been in it for a while, is that things sometimes actually take a while to actually kind of like to kind of get to any kind of like meaningful level. And I can think back to even like kind of Contactless being really excited about that in 2005. Yeah, it wasn't until we got past 2012 that we got into meaningful levels, and actually sort of like some 6, 7, 8 years later that it's now the everyday kind of thing. So sometimes these things take a while, and I think you will absolutely get the wallet will, to Laura's point earlier, will kind of get more and more kind of prevalent in terms of how we go about making all different sorts of transactions. In that wallet, you'll have a bunch of different credentials, right? So we go we go past the color-based world. You'll have whether it be kind of like your bank account credentials, your credit credentials, your crypto credentials, your digital cash, whatever they might be. Then I think that wallet then it will enable kind of experiences more and more. In terms of the kind of like the morphing of like the physical world with kind of like digital world, for sure you see more of that. You see more use of technology. Interesting, like kind of identification is kind of obviously kind of key. Age verification. You're already kind of seeing smart companies doing good things in that space to enable transactions in store to actually be age verified. It's not too big a step to actually go from that to being sort of like identity verified, or even therefore, the payment kind of comes off the back of it. I think there's some exciting times ahead for us in payments. That's what makes this such a brilliant industry to be part of.
Absolutely. Be interesting to see if we had this same discussion next year, how far along we have moved towards that minority report scenario by then. John, are you able to share, without giving anything confidential away, any plans sort of in the next few years that you're thinking about with regards to mobile, perhaps in store, or any other developments in the mobile space?
Yeah, well, in truth, I think a lot of multi-channel retailers might class themselves as omni-channel, and I think in truth most of them are actually multi-channel, and we haven't got to that omni-channel space yet. But I think we're on that trajectory. A big chunk of our e-commerce revenue already comes from bricks and mortar stores, as we offer that endless aisle solution. I think the open banking will help as we adopt open banking not only in the e-commerce space, m-commerce, but in the bricks and mortar. I think that will be really good. I think it'll be really good for the higher end transactions as well, because of the security controls around using your bank account to pay will really help us in stores in our with the higher AOVs. So I think that's on the road. I think there'll be a proliferation in wallets and super apps. I think but the wallets might include crypto payments, But I think the challenge on terms of crypto payments is how we do settlement and how we do refunds. So I think that's the challenge there, because obviously we might take a payment one day and then we have to find that we have to do it at a higher level on a refund the next day. So, but I think providers will find solutions for merchants in that space, and we'll be able to adopt crypto at some stage. So in terms of, I think that's about where we are.
That's quite a few things.
And of course, I say the super apps. I think there'll be subscription models in there. So if we look at how Amazon do Amazon Prime, our CEO has already stated, in the open, that we will do a subscription model in our app and our Frasers Plus solution. So, and I think retailers will go more down the super app. But how long will the super app last for? Because obviously there's the metaverse that's coming down the track as well. So that's another whole argument.
I think you've just identified 3 extra panel sessions that we could have on those subjects, just as standalone pieces.
Yeah, and it all affects payments as well, doesn't it? Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
fantastic.
So as has previously been said, I think it doesn't stand still, does it? It never will.
No, absolutely. Where do you see the next evolution going, Eelco?
Yeah, with the risk of repeating what a lot of my smart colleagues already said, I think it's definitely a transition period. So a lot of people are now very comfortable with the fact to use their mobile device as a form of identification, whether that's payment related, whether it's related to having your loyalty cards on there. There's a lot of different things that people are very comfortably storing on their mobile device. And in the near future, whether that's through some of the super apps that were mentioned, or whether it's through some of the existing payment systems we already have in place, I think that is where the biggest use case will be. So biometrics, of course, will be sort of the final stage, but my guess is that for the next few years, there will be more and more different applications of making payments more frictionless by maximizing the fact that you've already have all your important details safely stored on your mobile device.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Last but not least, Sergeant.
A lot has been said already, so I think, I live in Vienna, in Austria, and I'm quite surprised every time I go to my local coffee place that I still cannot pay with my card. And you would be surprised that this is Vienna, so it's not like a third world country. So before going like to future, I think there is still something that we need to do about actually getting the terminals out there for people to start paying in the physical world. Online, of course, is a different story, and the whole convergence. But to comment on this, I see a convergence of trends of identity and of payments sort of blending in the next couple of years or short term. Yeah.
There's certainly that opportunity to bring together mobile and identity to power new journeys. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we're about out of time, so I just wanted to see if there are any questions from the audience. Anything? Sorry, really hard to see. Any questions at all? Okay. Well, thank you. I think it's been a really interesting and varied conversation. I'd like to thank all the panellists for joining, and thank you for listening.